Jake Wilson hated the night shift. The fluorescent lights at Orbital Station 12 buzzed like angry wasps, and the coffee machine had been broken for 3 weeks. He was the only mechanic on duty, which meant every piece of junk that limped into the station became his problem. Tonight was supposed to be quiet. He planned to finish some paperwork, maybe watch a movie on his tablet, and collect his paycheck without any drama. Then the alarm started screaming. A small ship tumbled through the docking bay doors, trailing sparks and venting atmosphere. It was barely holding together, the hull scorched black in places with panels hanging off like loose teeth. Jake grabbed his toolkit and ran toward the bay, his boots clanging on the metal floor. He'd seen plenty of damaged ships before, but this one looked like it had flown through a war zone. When the airlock finally cycled open, Jake expected to find some drunk pilot or maybe a smuggler running from the law. Instead he found a child. An alien child, sure, but still just a kid. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with pale blue skin that shimmered under the harsh lights and enormous golden eyes that were red from crying. The kid was shaking, huddled in the pilot's seat that was way too big for them. Jake's chest tightened. He had a daughter back on Earth about the same age. The protective instinct hit him like a punch to the gut. The child started speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes and rushing water. Jake's translator earpiece struggled to keep up, but he caught fragments. Lost. Scared. Home. Need help. The kid pointed at the ship's dead control panel with trembling fingers. Jake did a quick assessment. The main engine was fried. Navigation was completely offline. Life support was running on emergency backup, which meant maybe 6 hours of air left. The hull had 3 separate breaches that needed sealing. This wasn't a quick fix. This was days of work and thousands of credits and parts. He heard heavy footsteps behind him. Mr. Patterson, the station manager, appeared in the doorway. Patterson was the kind of guy who counted paper clips and timed bathroom breaks. He took one look at the situation and his face went red. "Absolutely not," Patterson said, crossing his arms. "We're not a charity, Wilson. Run their ID, check their credit balance, and if they can't pay, they're gone in 20 minutes. Jake pulled up the ship's registration on his datapad. The ID came back clean but basic. No credit accounts linked. No emergency contacts listed. No distress beacon activated. This kid was alone and broke. "Sir, they're just a child," Jake said quietly. "We can't just throw them out. Their ship barely made it here. They won't survive if we send them away." Patterson's expression didn't soften even a little. "Not our problem. Station policy is crystal clear. No payment, no service. Get them out of here before my shift ends, or it's coming out of your paycheck." He turned and walked away, already pulling out his phone to complain to someone about something. Jake stood there for a long moment looking at the kid. Those big golden eyes stared back at him, hopeful and terrified at the same time. He thought about his daughter, Chloe, safe at home with her mom. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be, what kind of example he wanted to set. Then he thought about his bank account, which was already running on fumes. His rent was due in a week. Chloe needed new shoes. His ex-wife was already on his case about being late with support payments. The kid made a small sound, almost like a whimper. Jake cursed under his breath and made a decision that would change everything. He waited until Patterson disappeared into his office, then got to work. He started with the hull breaches, using patch sealant from his personal stash. The station's supply room was locked, so Jake pulled parts from decommissioned ships in the scrap bay. An old plasma regulator here, some navigation chips there. He knew every inch of that station, knew where every spare part was hiding. The kid watched him work, silent but attentive. After about an hour, they started handing Jake tools before he even asked for them. Wrench, plasma torch, wire stripper. The kid was sharp, picking up on patterns quickly. Jake found himself explaining what he was doing, even though he wasn't sure how much the translator was catching. "See, the problem with these older model engines is the cooling system," Jake said, elbow deep in the engine compartment. "If the coolant lines crack, the whole thing overheats and shuts down as a safety measure. We need to bypass these 3 connections and reroute through the secondary system." The kid nodded seriously like they understood every word. Hours blurred together. Jake's back started screaming from being bent over the engine. His hands were covered in burns from hot metal and chemical stains from coolant fluid. He raided his own locker for replacement parts he'd been saving for his personal projects. Every credit he spent felt like a small stab to his future, but he couldn't stop. Around hour 10 he had to make a choice. The navigation computer needed a complete replacement. The cheapest option was 800 credits at the station's parts shop. Jake checked his account balance. He had 920 credits total. That was grocery money. That was keeping the lights on money. He bought the part. By hour 14, Jake's eyes were burning with exhaustion. The kid had fallen asleep in the pilot's seat, curled up like Chloe did after a long day. Jake worked as quietly as he could, not wanting to wake them. Finally, at 6:47 in the morning, Jake hit the ignition switch. The engine hummed to life, smooth and steady. All systems showed green. The ship was space-worthy again. The kid woke up to the sound and their whole face transformed. They jumped up and wrapped their arms around Jake's leg, babbling in that musical language. The translator kept repeating "thank you" over and over. Jake programmed a safe route into the navigation system, triple-checked every coordinate, and loaded emergency contacts for the nearest trade stations. He made sure the kid knew how to activate the distress beacon if anything went wrong. As the small ship lifted off and disappeared into the black, Jake felt good despite everything. Tired, broke, but good. Patterson arrived for the morning shift and immediately pulled up the station logs. His face went purple when he saw the unauthorized repairs, the parts requisitions, everything logged under Jake's ID. "You're fired," Patterson said flatly. "Effective immediately. And I'm docking your final paycheck for the materials you stole." Jake was too exhausted to argue. He grabbed his toolkit, the only thing he really owned, and caught the next shuttle back to Earth. He had 43 credits to his name, no job prospects, and rent due in 5 days. But somewhere out there, a kid was flying home safely. That had to count for something, right? Jake didn't know that 3 days later, his simple act of kindness would bring an entire alien armada to Earth's doorstep. He didn't know his name would become known across a dozen star systems. He just knew he'd done the right thing even if it cost him everything. Jake woke up to his daughter shaking his shoulder. His apartment in Seattle was tiny, barely enough room for the two of them during his custody weekends, and the morning sun was cutting through the cheap blinds at an angle that told him he'd overslept. Again. "Dad, wake up. Something's happening. It's on every channel." Chloe's voice had that edge of panic that immediately cut through his exhaustion. Jake sat up, his back still aching from those 14 hours bent over an alien engine 3 days ago. His daughter was holding her tablet, and her hands were shaking slightly. "What's wrong, honey?" She turned the screen toward him. Every news app was showing the same live footage. The sky above Seattle, above every major city on Earth, was filled with ships. Not the boxy cargo vessels that humanity had gotten used to seeing over the past 20 years since first contact. These were different. Massive warships that looked like they'd been carved from crystal and steel, each one easily the size of an aircraft carrier. They hung in the atmosphere like predators, blocking out the sun in places. Jake's blood went cold. There had to be hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. The camera feeds showed them over New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai. Everywhere. A global deployment. He grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. Every channel was in emergency broadcast mode. A news anchor with barely controlled terror in her eyes was speaking in rapid-fire sentences. Still no official statement from world governments. The ships appeared approximately 40 minutes ago, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in coordinated formations around the planet. Military analysts are calling this an invasion force. We're now going live to the United Nations emergency session. The feed cut to a packed UN chamber. Diplomats were shouting over each other in a dozen languages. Jake recognized the Galactic Council representative, a tall insectoid alien who usually handled trade disputes. The alien looked as confused as the humans. Then the feed changed again. A new message was being broadcast on every frequency, every screen, every device connected to any network on Earth. The translation was crude, mechanical, but the words were crystal clear. "We are the Krevithi Empire. We seek the human-designated Jake Wilson. Produce him immediately or we will interpret his concealment as an act of hostility." Jake's entire world seemed to tilt sideways. Chloe turned to look at him, her eyes huge. "Dad? That's you. Why do aliens know your name?" He couldn't answer. His mouth had gone completely dry. The kid. The ship. 3 days ago. What had he done? Who had that child been? His phone started ringing. Then Chloe's tablet. Then his laptop. Every device in the apartment was going off at once. He saw his ex-wife's name flash across the screen, then his brother, then numbers he didn't recognize. The whole world was trying to reach him. Someone pounded on his apartment door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Jake Wilson. Federal agents. Open the door now." Jake looked at his daughter. She was scared and he had no idea what to tell her. He opened the door to find 6 people in tactical gear, weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. Behind them he could see his neighbors peeking out of their apartments, phones up and recording. "Mr. Wilson," the lead agent said, showing a badge. "You need to come with us right now. This is a matter of planetary security." They didn't give him time to change out of his sweatpants. They put him in a black SUV with tinted windows, and Chloe started crying as her mom pulled up to collect her. Jake tried to tell her everything would be okay, but the words felt like lies. He had no idea what was happening. The drive to Joint Base Lewis McChord took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Nobody would tell him anything. The agents just stared straight ahead, speaking occasionally into their radios in code he didn't understand. They brought him underground, through security checkpoints with retinal scanners and armed guards every 50 feet. Finally, they pushed him into a conference room where a woman in an Air Force general's uniform was standing next to a holographic display of Earth. The planet was completely surrounded by red dots representing alien ships. There had to be over 800 of them. General Rebecca Hayes turned to look at him, and Jake had never seen anyone look so stressed in his entire life. Her jaw was tight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept since the ships arrived. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "In the last hour we have confirmed the presence of 837 Crevathi warships in orbit around our planet. Each one carries enough firepower to level a major city. They have made no hostile moves, but they have also refused all diplomatic contact except to repeat their demand for you." She paused, studying his face. "So I need you to tell me very carefully and very truthfully what exactly you did to these aliens." Jake's hands were shaking. "I fixed a ship 3 days ago. At the station where I worked. There was a kid inside and they were scared and the ship was damaged and my boss said to kick them out, but I couldn't just leave a child stranded in space." General Hayes stared at him for a long moment. "You fixed a ship?" "Yes, ma'am." "And that's it? You didn't steal anything? Didn't take hostages? Didn't accidentally trigger some kind of galactic incident?" "I just replaced some parts and got their engine running again. The kid had no money so I used my own. Then they left. That's everything, I swear." Someone else entered the room, a man in a suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "General, the Crevathi are broadcasting again. They're demanding proof of life for Wilson within the next 2 hours, or they're interpreting our silence as confirmation that we've harmed him." Hayes closed her eyes for a moment. "They think we've kidnapped him or killed him. Apparently their prince went missing 4 days ago during some kind of training mission. The entire empire has been searching for him. When they traced his ship's signature to human space and then we didn't immediately produce Wilson, they assumed the worst." Jake felt like he was going to be sick. "Prince? That kid was a prince." The man in the suit turned to look at him. "Not just any prince. Crown Prince Lixen, heir to 40 star systems and approximately 7 billion Crevathi citizens. You repaired the ship of the single most important child in their entire empire." General Hayes was watching him carefully now, like she was trying to figure out if he was incredibly lucky or incredibly stupid. "Mr. Wilson, did you know who that child was when you helped them?" "No, ma'am. I just saw a scared kid with a broken ship." She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. "And you helped them anyway? Cost you your job and your savings according to the file we pulled?" "Yes, ma'am." For the first time since he'd arrived, General Hayes smiled. It wasn't a happy smile exactly, but there was something almost like respect in it. "Well, Mr. Wilson, congratulations. You may have just accidentally prevented a war. Now we need to get you on a shuttle and up to that flagship before they decide we're stalling. The fate of 8 billion humans is currently resting on whether or not you fixed that engine properly." Jake thought about that small ship lifting off into the dark, about those big golden eyes filled with gratitude. He thought about Chloe, safe with her mother but terrified for him. He thought about how 3 days ago he'd been a broke mechanic with no prospects, and now the entire human race was depending on him. "I fixed it properly," he said quietly. "That kid made it home safe or we wouldn't be having this conversation." General Hayes nodded. "Then let's go introduce you to your new friends and hope they're feeling grateful instead of suspicious." The shuttle ride up to the Crevathi flagship was the longest 30 minutes of Jake's life. He sat strapped into a seat next to General Hayes, watching through the viewport as Earth got smaller below them. The alien warships loomed larger with every passing second, and Jake could see details now that had been invisible from the ground. Weapons ports. Armor plating that shimmered with energy shields. These weren't just ships. They were floating fortresses designed to obliterate anything that got in their way. "Try not to look terrified," General Hayes said quietly. "First impressions matter, and right now you're representing all of humanity." "No pressure or anything," Jake muttered, wiping his sweaty palms on his sweatpants. He was still wearing the same clothes he'd slept in. Nobody had given him time to change, and now he was about to meet alien royalty looking like he just rolled out of bed. Because he had. The flagship was called the Eternal Dawn, according to the shuttle pilot, and it was the largest vessel in the Crevathi fleet. As they approached the docking bay, Jake could see it was easily 3 miles long, maybe more. The hull wasn't metal like human ships. It looked almost organic, like it had been grown rather than built, with surfaces that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the angle of the light. The docking process was smooth, professional. The bay doors opened like a mouth, and their shuttle settled onto a platform with barely a bump. Through the viewport, Jake could see Crevathi soldiers lined up in formation. Dozens of them, maybe 100. They wore armor that looked like it had been forged from the same material as the ship, and each one carried a weapon that hummed with contained energy. "They're honoring you," General Hayes said, noticing his expression. "That's a ceremonial guard. If they wanted to hurt you, we'd already be dead." That didn't make Jake feel better at all. The shuttle door opened and the air that rushed in was different. Cooler, with a faint scent like ozone and something floral he couldn't identify. Jake stood on shaky legs and followed General Hayes down the ramp. The moment his boots hit the deck, every single Crevathi soldier snapped to attention with a sound like thunder. Their fists hit their chest plates in perfect unison. A tall Crevathi stepped forward from the formation. This one was clearly older, with pale blue skin marked by dozens of scars that looked like they'd been earned in actual combat. Their eyes were a deeper gold than the child's had been, and they carried themselves with the kind of authority that made generals look like privates. "Engineer Jake Wilson," the alien said, and the translator in Jake's ear rendered the words with unexpected warmth. "I am Commander Torval, Shield of the Crown and Protector of the Royal Line. On behalf of the Crevathi Empire, I welcome you aboard the Eternal Dawn." Jake's mouth was dry. Thank you. I think. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I swear I didn't know that kid was important. I was just trying to help." Something that might have been a smile crossed Torval's face. "Yes, we know. That is precisely why we are here." The commander turned and gestured toward a massive doorway that had opened in the wall. "The Crown Prince is eager to see you again. If you would follow me." They walked through corridors that made Jake feel like he was inside a living thing. The walls pulsed with soft bioluminescent light, and the floor seemed to adjust under his feet, making each step easier somehow. Crevathi soldiers and crew members stopped what they were doing to watch him pass, and Jake couldn't tell if their expressions were friendly or hostile. Alien faces were hard to read. After what felt like miles of walking, they reached a set of enormous doors that must have been 30 feet tall. They opened silently, revealing a chamber so vast that Jake's brain struggled to process the scale. The ceiling disappeared into shadows far above, and the walls were covered in what looked like living crystal that grew in intricate patterns. At the far end of the chamber sat a throne. It was massive, carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to drink in light. And on that throne, looking tiny and out of place, sat the kid Jake had helped 3 days ago. Prince Lixen's face lit up when he saw Jake. The kid jumped down from the throne and started running across the chamber, and immediately a dozen guards moved to intercept. But Torval held up a hand, stopping them. The prince crashed into Jake's legs, wrapping small arms around him in a fierce hug. Jake stood there awkwardly, not sure what protocol was for hugging alien royalty, while the kid babbled in that musical language. The translator struggled to keep up. "You came. I told them you would come. I told them you were good and kind and brave, but they didn't believe me. They thought humans were dangerous." Torval cleared his throat gently, and the prince reluctantly let go of Jake, stepping back but still beaming up at him. The commander moved to stand beside the throne, and his expression had shifted to something grave and serious. "Engineer Wilson, you deserve an explanation for why 800 warships currently surround your planet." Torval's voice echoed in the massive chamber. 4 days ago, Crown Prince Lixen was on a covert training mission, learning to navigate independently as all royal heirs must. His escort was ambushed by political rivals who saw an opportunity to eliminate the succession line. The prince's ship barely escaped through an emergency faster-than-light jump, but the navigation system was damaged. He ended up in your space at your station. Jake felt sick. He'd had no idea the situation had been that serious. "We tracked his ship's signature to human territory," Torval continued, "and we prepared for the worst. Humanity is still considered a young species by galactic standards. Aggressive, unpredictable, prone to violence and self-interest. We assumed that when the prince arrived at your station he would be held hostage. Ransomed. Perhaps worse. General Hayes was very still beside Jake, her face carefully neutral. He could tell she was furious at the characterization of humanity, but she was too professional to show it. "We assembled this fleet," Torval said, gesturing to encompass the ships surrounding Earth, "and prepared for war. We were ready to do whatever was necessary to recover our prince. But when we finally traced his movements and reviewed the station's security footage, we found something that shocked the entire Crevathi High Command." The commander touched something on his wrist, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. It showed grainy security footage of Station 12, of Jake working on the small ship. Hours and hours of footage sped up, showing him cannibalizing parts from other ships, burning through his own supplies, working himself to exhaustion. "You knew nothing about who he was," Torval said softly. "Your supervisor ordered you to turn the prince away. You had every reason to obey. You were low on money. You had responsibilities. But you looked at a frightened child, and you chose to sacrifice everything you had to help them. You asked for nothing in return. You expected nothing." The hologram shifted, showing the moment the ship's engine came to life, showing the prince hugging Jake's leg, showing Jake programming the navigation system with careful precision. "In 347 years of space exploration," Commander Torval said, and his voice carried an emotion that the translator rendered as wonder, "the Crevathi Empire has encountered 163 spacefaring species. We have seen countless acts of courage and cleverness. But this kind of selfless compassion toward a stranger, with no possibility of reward from someone with so little to give." He paused. "We have never seen this before. Not once." Prince Lixen stepped forward again, holding something in his small hands. It was Jake's old wrench, the one he'd used to tighten the final bolts on the prince's ship. But it had been transformed. The handle was now wrapped in precious metals that Jake didn't recognize, and the head was inlaid with gems that caught the light and seemed to glow from within. "You gave me everything," the prince said in careful, practiced English. "You gave me hope when I was scared. You gave me safety when I was in danger. You gave me home when I was lost." The child's golden eyes were bright with emotion. "Now my people want to give you something too. Not because we have to. Because we want to. Because you showed us what true kindness looks like." Jake took the wrench with trembling hands. It was heavier than it should have been and warm to the touch. "Your Highness, I didn't do anything special. Any decent person would have helped a kid in trouble." Commander Torval and Prince Lixen exchanged a glance, and something passed between them that Jake couldn't quite read. Then Torval spoke again. "That is where you are wrong, Engineer Wilson. Most beings would not have helped. Most would have calculated the risk, weighed the cost, and chosen self-preservation. You chose differently. And in doing so, you have given the Crevathi Empire a gift far more valuable than you realize. You have shown us that humanity, despite its youth and chaos, possesses a quality we thought had been bred out of the galaxy long ago. Compassion without calculation. Help without expectation of reward." The commander's expression softened slightly. "We came here prepared for war, Engineer Wilson. Instead we found hope. And now we wish to offer your species something that has never been extended to such a young civilization. We wish to offer friendship, alliance, and a place among the elder races of the galaxy, earned not through conquest or technology, but through the simple act of one human who saw a child in need and chose to help." Jake stood there in that massive chamber, holding his transformed wrench, with an alien prince beaming at him and 800 warships surrounding his planet. He thought about Chloe, about General Hayes, about the 8 billion people back on Earth who had no idea their entire future had just changed because a broke mechanic couldn't ignore a scared kid. "I just fixed a ship," Jake said weakly. Prince Lixen laughed, a sound like bells. "You fixed everything." Jake spent the next 3 hours in what Commander Torval called a diplomatic briefing, which was really just a fancy way of saying they threw him into the deep end of galactic politics and hoped he could swim. General Hayes sat beside him, taking notes on a tablet while various Crevathi officials presented proposals that made Jake's head spin. Technology transfers, trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, military cooperation treaties. The Crevathi weren't just offering friendship. They were offering to catapult humanity forward by centuries, all because Jake had been too stubborn to turn away a scared kid. But there was one proposal that kept coming back, the one that Commander Torval seemed most excited about. They wanted Jake to become the first human chief engineer at the Imperial Fleet Academy on the Crevathi homeworld. Not as a token gesture or a symbolic position. A real job, training the next generation of Crevathi engineers, sharing human problem-solving techniques with alien students. "I'm a mechanic," Jake said for the third time. "I fix cargo haulers and patch hull breaches. I never even finished college. You want me to teach at your most prestigious military academy? Prince Lixen, who had insisted on staying for the entire meeting despite his handler's protests, piped up from where he sat swinging his legs on an oversized chair. You fixed my ship when no one else would. You made it work with broken parts and no money. That's not just mechanics. That's art. Commander Torval nodded. The prince is correct. Crevathi engineers are trained to follow protocols, to use the best equipment, to solve problems by overwhelming them with resources. You solved problems by thinking differently. By making connections we would never see. That perspective is exactly what our students need. Jake looked at General Hayes, hoping she'd tell him this was all insane. Instead, she was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Mr. Wilson, she said carefully, do you understand what's being offered here? This isn't just about you. Every agreement they're proposing is contingent on your acceptance. They want you to be the bridge between our species. The proof that humans and Crevathi can work together. That's insane, Jake said. I'm nobody. Yesterday I was unemployed and broke. You can't build an interstellar alliance around one random guy who fixed a ship. Yet here we are, General Hayes said softly. The shuttle ride back to Earth was quiet. Jake stared out the viewport, watching the Crevathi fleet slowly rotate in their formations like a deadly ballet. General Hayes had given him 48 hours to make his decision. 48 hours to choose between staying on Earth with his daughter, his life, everything he knew, or taking a leap into the unknown that would affect billions of people. When they landed at the military base, there was a media circus waiting. Someone had leaked the story and now the whole world knew that Jake Wilson, failed mechanic from Seattle, was somehow at the center of first contact with a major alien empire. Reporters shouted questions as security rushed him to a waiting car. Cameras flashed. Drones buzzed overhead. They took him to a secure facility outside the city, a place where he could think without the whole planet watching. But thinking was the last thing Jake wanted to do. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that massive throne room, heard Commander Torval's voice explaining how humanity was being judged based on Jake's actions. His phone had been returned to him and it was exploding with messages. His ex-wife had called 17 times. His brother wanted to know if Jake had lost his mind. Friends he hadn't talked to in years were suddenly reaching out. And buried in all of that was a message from Chloe. Dad, everyone at school is talking about you. Mom won't tell me what's happening. Are you okay? Are the aliens nice? I miss you. Jake stared at that message for a long time. His daughter was his whole world. The custody arrangement meant he only got to see her every other weekend, but those weekends were everything to him. If he took the Crevathi offer, he'd be light years away. Sure, they promised regular transport, advanced communication technology, but it wouldn't be the same. He'd miss her growing up. Miss school plays and soccer games and first dates and everything that mattered. But if he said no, what then? The Crevathi had made it clear that their offers were a package deal. They weren't interested in trade agreements or technology transfers with a humanity that rejected their gesture of friendship. It was all or nothing. Jake's choice would determine whether Earth joined the galactic community as an equal partner or remained isolated and primitive for another century. The next morning, a news alert woke him up. Jake grabbed his phone and immediately wished he hadn't. His old boss from Station 12, Mr. Patterson, was on every major network doing interviews. The man who had fired Jake for helping the prince was now claiming credit for the entire thing. I authorized the repair, Patterson said with a straight face to a reporter from CNN. I saw potential in Wilson, saw that he had the skills to handle a delicate diplomatic situation. I made the call to extend assistance to the prince, knowing it could benefit humanity's standing with the Crevathi Empire. Jake felt his blood pressure spike. The man was lying through his teeth, rewriting history to make himself look like a visionary instead of the petty bureaucrat who had stolen Jake's last paycheck. But it got worse. Politicians were already fighting over who would control the relationship with the Crevathi. Corporate executives were demanding access to the technology transfers. Everyone wanted a piece of what Jake had accidentally created, and nobody seemed to care about the actual choice he was facing. A knock on the door interrupted his spiral into anger. General Hayes stood there with 2 cups of coffee and a tablet tucked under her arm. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept any more than Jake had. Saw the Patterson interview, she said, handing him a coffee. Makes you want to punch something, doesn't it? That's an understatement. Hayes sat down across from him, setting her tablet on the table between them. Can I be honest with you, Mr. Wilson? Off the record, just 2 people talking? Jake nodded. The cynics and the politicians, they're saying you just got lucky. That you had no idea who you were helping, that it was pure chance. And they're probably right. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. But here's what matters. When you saw a scared kid with a broken ship, you didn't see an opportunity or a threat or a calculation. You saw a child who needed help. That's the most fundamentally human thing I've ever heard. Plenty of humans wouldn't have helped, Jake said bitterly. True. But plenty would have. That's the point the Crevathi are making. They've been exploring space for centuries, meeting species after species, and they've learned that most civilizations lose that instinct as they advance. Help becomes transactional. Kindness becomes strategic. But humanity is still young enough, still raw enough, that we can look at a stranger and just decide to help them. No grand plan. No calculation. Just basic decency. She pushed the tablet toward him. This is the full proposal. Everything the Crevathi are offering. Technology that could solve climate change. Medical advances that could cure diseases we've been fighting for generations. Trade agreements that could lift billions out of poverty. All of it hinges on you taking that position at their academy. On you being the proof that humans and Crevathi can build something together. Jake stared at the tablet without touching it. What about Chloe? What about my life? That's the question only you can answer, General Hayes said. But I'll tell you what I told my own kids when they asked if they should join the military. Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one. Sometimes serving something bigger than yourself means sacrifice. Not because it's fair, but because it matters. She stood up, leaving the tablet on the table. You've got until tomorrow night to decide. Whatever you choose, I'll respect it. But Jake? That little girl of yours is going to grow up in whatever world you help create. Whether that's a world where humanity stands alone, or a world where we have friends among the stars. That's worth considering. After she left, Jake sat there for a long time, staring at the tablet. Finally, he picked it up and started reading. Really reading, not just skimming. He looked at the technology proposals, the cultural exchange programs, the educational opportunities that would be open to human students. He thought about Chloe growing up in a universe where humans were welcomed, where she could travel to alien worlds, where the possibilities were endless instead of limited. He thought about the prince's golden eyes filled with gratitude. He thought about Commander Torval's words about compassion being rare in the galaxy. Then he thought about his own father, who had worked in a factory for 40 years, never complaining, never asking for recognition, just doing what needed to be done to provide for his family. His dad used to say that being a man meant doing the right thing even when it cost you everything. Jake picked up his phone and called Chloe. His ex-wife answered first, her voice tight with stress and anger, but he asked to talk to his daughter. When Chloe's voice came through, small and worried, Jake felt his heart break a little. Hey, sweetheart. I need to tell you something important. Are you in trouble, Dad? No, baby. I'm not in trouble. But I have to make a big decision and I need you to understand something. No matter what happens, no matter where I am, you're always going to be the most important thing in my life. You know that, right? I know, Dad. Jake closed his eyes, made his choice, and started explaining. 10 months had passed since Jake Wilson boarded a Crevathi transport ship and left Earth behind. 10 months of learning an alien language, adapting to different gravity, and figuring out how to teach students who could calculate faster than supercomputers but had never learned to improvise. The Imperial Fleet Academy sat on the edge of a sprawling city that looked like someone had grown buildings out of crystal and light. Jake still wasn't used to the view from his quarters, 3 purple moons hanging in a sky that shifted from green to violet depending on the time of day. But right now, standing in Workshop 7 with 20 young Crevathi engineers staring at him with those unsettling golden eyes, Jake felt more at home than he had in months. This was familiar territory. Oil-stained floors, the smell of hot metal, the organized chaos of parts and tools scattered across workbenches. It didn't matter that the tools were designed for hands with 6 fingers or that the engines they worked on could cross galaxies. The fundamentals were the same. A student named Kaershan, one of the brightest in the class, had just watched their project fail for the 3rd time. The young Crevathi's skin had flushed a darker blue, which Jake had learned meant embarrassment or frustration. The student's engine design was perfect on paper, every calculation precise, every component top of the line. But the prototype sat silent on the bench, refusing to start. I don't understand, Kaershan said, their translator rendering the words with barely contained frustration. The math is flawless. The parts are optimal. It should work. Jake walked over to the workbench, his boots leaving prints on the polished floor. He'd stopped feeling self-conscious about being the only human in a room full of aliens who were taller, stronger, and smarter than him in almost every measurable way. What he brought to the table wasn't strength or computational power. It was something else entirely. The engine doesn't care about your math, Jake said, picking up a tool that looked like a wrench had a baby with a plasma cutter. It doesn't care that you're brilliant or that you use the best parts money can buy. Engines are stubborn. They have personalities. You can't just force them to work. You have to listen to what they're telling you. He tapped the engine casing lightly, and a faint rattle echoed back. Hear that? That's your problem right there. You've got a loose coupling in the secondary intake. The parts are perfect, but they're not talking to each other properly. Sometimes good enough parts that work together beat perfect parts that don't. Kershan's eyes widened as Jake showed them how to adjust the coupling, using a technique that probably violated 6 different Crevithy engineering protocols. But when they hit the ignition switch, the engine hummed to life, smooth and steady. The student's skin flickered through several colors that Jake had learned meant joy and surprise. But the manual says that configuration is suboptimal, Kershan protested, even as they stared at their now functioning engine. The manual was written by engineers who never had to fix a cargo hauler with a broken engine and only half the parts they needed, Jake said with a slight smile. Sometimes the optimal solution is the one that actually works, not the one that looks best on paper. He moved through the workshop, checking on other students' projects, offering suggestions that made the Crevithy instructors shake their heads in disbelief. Jake's methods were messy, unconventional, and violated dozens of established engineering principles. They also worked about 90% of the time, which was better than most of the by-the-book approaches. After class, Jake returned to his office, a small space with a window overlooking the academy grounds. His walls were covered with photos of Chloe, sent via the quantum communication link the Crevithy had installed. His daughter was 12 now, growing up faster than he could keep track of even with weekly video calls. She'd gotten braces, made the soccer team, had her first crush on a boy named Tyler who Jake would definitely need to have words with someday. Missing her hurt like a physical ache. But she was also thriving in ways that made the sacrifice worthwhile. The technology transfers from the Crevithy had transformed Earth. Clean energy had solved the climate crisis. Medical advances had eliminated dozens of diseases. Chloe was growing up in a world with possibilities that Jake's generation had never imagined. And it wasn't just technology. Human engineers were being recruited across the galaxy now, not because they were smarter or more advanced, but because they brought something unique to the table. The ability to make things work with limited resources. Creative problem-solving born from necessity. A willingness to break rules when the rules didn't make sense. Other species called it human ingenuity, but Jake knew it was simpler than that. It was just being stubborn enough to keep trying when logic said to give up. His tablet chimed with an incoming message. Commander Torval wanted to see him. Jake made his way through the academy corridors, still getting occasional stares from Crevithy students who weren't used to seeing a human. He'd become something of a legend on campus, the alien who had saved their prince and changed the course of galactic history by being too stubborn to follow orders. Torval's office was in the oldest part of the academy, with walls that showed their age through layers of repairs and modifications. The commander looked up from a holographic display showing fleet deployments across a dozen star systems. Instructor Wilson, Torval said, gesturing to a chair that had been specially modified for human proportions. I have news from Earth that I thought you should hear directly from me. Jake's stomach dropped. Is Chloe okay? Your daughter is fine, Torval said quickly. This concerns your former employer. The one who took credit for your actions. Jake had tried not to think about Patterson over the past months. The anger had faded into something more like pity for a small man who needed to steal other people's accomplishments to feel important. There was an investigation, Torval continued. Human authorities discovered that he had been systematically overcharging for repairs and pocketing the difference for years. He also fired 3 other employees under questionable circumstances. He's been removed from his position and faces criminal charges. Jake nodded slowly. I'd like to say I'm surprised, but I'm really not. There's more, Torval said. Station 12 has been completely rebuilt and expanded. It's now one of the primary diplomatic hubs between Earth and the Crevithy Empire. The new manager specifically requested that I ask if you have any recommendations for the chief engineering position. They want someone who understands that helping people is more important than following regulations. Jake thought about that for a moment, about the dozens of good mechanics he'd known over the years who had hearts bigger than their bank accounts. Yeah, I know a few people who might be perfect for that. Good. Torval leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with those unsettling golden eyes. I also wanted to tell you that Prince Lixen will be enrolling at the academy next year. He specifically requested to be placed in your advanced repair class. Jake felt a smile tug at his lips. The prince wants to be a mechanic? He wants to understand what you do. How you think. He says that leading an empire is like fixing a broken engine. You have to understand all the parts, how they work together, and sometimes you have to be willing to break the rules to make things work. Torval paused. He's not wrong. You've taught us more than engineering, Instructor Wilson. You've taught us that compassion isn't weakness. That helping others isn't a transaction. That sometimes the right thing to do is the thing that costs you everything. Jake looked out the window at the alien sky, thinking about how far he'd come from that cramped apartment in Seattle. I just fixed a ship, Commander. Everyone keeps acting like I did something extraordinary, but I just helped a scared kid. That shouldn't be extraordinary. That should be normal. Perhaps, Torval said quietly. But in a galaxy where most species have forgotten how to help without calculating the cost, normal becomes extraordinary. Your species remembers something that the rest of us lost somewhere along the way. The ability to look at a stranger and see someone worth saving, not because it benefits you but because it's right. Later that evening, Jake video called Chloe. She answered immediately, her face filling the screen with a gap-toothed grin. The braces were gone now, replaced by a smile that reminded him so much of her mother. Dad, guess what? I got accepted into the engineering program at MIT. They have a whole new department focused on human-crevity collaborative projects. Jake felt his chest swell with pride. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. I want to be like you, Dad, Chloe said, her expression turning serious. Not because you're famous or because you met aliens, but because you showed me that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Jake had to clear his throat before he could respond. You're already better than me, Chloe. You always have been. After they said goodbye, Jake sat in his small office, surrounded by photos of his daughter and tools from two different worlds. He thought about that night at Station 12, about a scared kid with golden eyes and a broken ship. About the choice he'd made without knowing it would change everything. The galaxy had learned something important from humanity, but humanity had learned something too. That their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their intelligence or their military might. It was their stubborn, impossible, beautiful refusal to give up on each other. The insistence that every life mattered, that every person deserved help, that kindness wasn't a luxury but a necessity. Jake Wilson had been a broke mechanic who couldn't turn away from a scared child. Now he was shaping the minds of future generations across multiple species, teaching them that the best engineering solution was often the one that came from the heart as much as the head. He picked up his old wrench, the one the prince had returned to him covered in precious metals. It was still a tool, still functional, but now it represented something more. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change entire worlds. That one person in one moment could choose compassion over convenience and set in motion events that would echo across the stars. And somewhere on Earth, in a world transformed by friendship between species, children were growing up knowing that humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or superiority, but through the simple act of one man who saw a child in need and decided to help. That was the real human superpower. Not ingenuity or adaptability or stubbornness, though those helped. It was the ability to look at the universe and insist, against all logic and self-interest, that kindness mattered. That helping others was never a mistake. That doing the right thing was its own reward even when the cost seemed too high. Jake Wilson had just been trying to fix a ship. But in doing so he'd helped fix something much bigger. He'd reminded the galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized.